All right, so here we are now with the fifth, I believe it's the fifth episode of our series on authoritarianism. Last time we talked about Eric Adams and the case that's going on in New York. There's a couple of developments there, a couple things taking place. The first is that Clement is going to, what's his first name? Paul Clement. Sorry, Paul Clement is going to be taking on the role of explaining why the prosecution should take place. He has not dropped his knowledge yet. That's going to happen the first week of March. So this is an issue that we're going to have to revisit. Also, I didn't do my homework. Phil gave me information to look up, and I didn't look it up, and that's my fault. So I'm not prepared to have a principled conversation. But speaking of principled, there is an opportunity here for a metric that I think Phil and I both agree on, which is that
Nice segue, by the way.
you like that. I worked on
Did.
that in front of the mirror. So there were a number of conservatives who resigned in the wake of this case, right? Principled resignation is, when somebody leaves their job because they feel like they're being asked to do something that they shouldn't do. So when people leave their positions in the government as a result of an administration change, that's no big deal. When Democrats leave their positions because they hate Republicans, or when Republicans leave their positions because they hate Democrats, that's no big deal. But when conservatives are leaving because of other conservatives, or when Democrats are leaving because of other Democrats, that is a warning sign, and that's something maybe we should take a look at. So we're going to go back into the Eric Adams case later when more information is available. But for now, today we're going to be talking about the birthright citizenship argument, and I'm going to pass it now to Phil, who's going to explain that.
Okay, and I just want to summarize for people who may not know what we were talking about. The in the court case that Jubal was talking about, Judge Ho is the one who's deciding on the case. Um, the Department of Justice said they want to drop the case. The defendant in this case, Eric Adams, was like, "Yay, drop the case." And so it seems like everybody's in agreement. What Judge Poe said was, our judicial system works when there's adversaries in a hearing, and in this case, both the prosecution and the defense are on the same side. So that's why he picked Paul Clements, Clement, who was the Solicitor General between 2004 and 2008, and just a brilliant legal mind. And so he's going to be the one essentially presenting the argument for why the case shouldn't be dropped. And so um, rather than rather than talk about it now, which is what we said previously, we're going to wait for that to play itself out and revisit this case. So today instead, we're going to talk about birthright citizenship. Now, again, I don't want to just assume that everybody knows what this is about, but one of the first things that President Trump did when he took office is he uh, issued an executive order that went ahead and essentially called for the end of birthright citizenship. The idea that anybody who was born in the United States is automatically a citizen of the United States. Um, as soon as the executive order came down, uh, people sued, and so there were some national preliminary injunctions that were filed early in February. I mean, it seems like it was 10 years ago that so much has been happening. So Judge Boardman, the uh, Biden nominee, did an injunction in early February. And then later on, there was Judge Kaufner, who was a Reagan nominee, also went ahead and issued an injunction. First, it was a temporary one, and after that, a it was he put an injunction on it where it couldn't be enacted or worked on until the court had a chance to deal with it. And so that's where we are right now, also in a holding pattern, waiting for this to be resolved. That's one of the challenges about what's going on right now, in my estimation, is that the court system works slowly.
Hmm.
The court system works really slowly, and executive orders can be issued like on an hourly basis. And so I know for a lot of people, They feel like the sky is falling because it looks like these executive orders are happening really quickly. And the response is kind of like, oh, the courts are getting
Right.
involved.
It's the tortoise and the hare, right? I mean
Correct.
that,
Correct.
and maybe I can offer a little bit of succor to people who are really concerned about all these executive orders. And you know, even as somebody who's center right, this is a lot, right? He's doing a lot. He's reaching for a lot. But issuing an executive order does not necessarily mean that that order is now the law, right? There is a process. There are a lot of things that Trump wants to do, and some of those things are things that he's just not going to be able to do, right? And I think that this qualifies as one of those things, right?
Right.
He has essentially said, correct me if I'm wrong, he's essentially said that he wants to consider a child born in America that was born to a woman who is not a citizen and has a father who is not a citizen, right?
Correct.
That child should not be a citizen, even if the child was born in on American ground. And so that that seems to me to be a direct violation of the 14th Amendment, right? I mean, correct me if I'm wrong.
No, you're 100% correct. And
So
the courts have ruled on this repeatedly.
right,
And
so
the
this
argue, yeah. So
go ahead, go ahead.
the argument they made, because the 14th Amendment says that anybody born in the United States, and this is the key phrase, subject to the jurisdiction thereof, right? The reason that phrase is in there is if somebody is a foreign, some from a foreign country is in the United States, like ambassador to France or ambassador to some country, or serving in a delegation from another country, and they have a child while they're in the United States, those people actually aren't subject to the jurisdiction of the United States. If the ambassador to France shoots somebody and kills somebody, the United States can't arrest them without the approval of France, right? They would have to waive their diplomatic immunity. So certain people aren't subject to the jurisdiction thereof. It used to be that Native Americans were considered not to be subject to the jurisdiction thereof, and Congress passed a law in 1924 that allowed Native Americans to be both citizens of the United States and the reservation that they're on. And so that phrase is key, subject to the jurisdiction thereof. What the Trump people are arguing is that um, undocumented workers are not subject to the jurisdiction of the United States. Well, it's pretty hard call them both criminals and not subject to the jurisdiction of the United States. So the argument is like untenable. I mean, Judge Kaufner was the one who he referred to it as blatantly unconstitutional, and said that he was surprised that they could get a lawyer to sign the brief. I mean,
Hmm.
that's how off the charts it is. So I agree with your assessment. This isn't going to have any effect. And for people who are wondering, like sort of what Jubal said about executive orders don't mean it's going to happen. One of the first executive orders that Barack Obama signed when he got into office was that Guantanamo Bay was going to be closed down in a year.
Hmm.
When he left the White House, Guantanamo Bay was still open.
Right.
Just because the president issues an executive order doesn't mean that's going to happen.
Right.
So,
So I think executive orders should be seen more of, you know, darts being thrown at the policy board. It's like this is our plan, right? We're gonna throw this dart. This is what we're gonna do. But whether or not you actually score that depends on what happens, right? Depends on whether or not that is legal. And at this point, I don't think it's. I think it's not legal to say that a person born in the country is not a citizen. Now that being said, if this is a conversation, the birthright citizenship conversation, it is maybe one worth having, because we do live in a different world today than we did 100 and 150 years ago, right? Uh, but there's a process for that. It doesn't happen just because the president says so, right?
right,
My understanding of if this was something that the country wanted to change, that it would require an amendment to the
Yeah,
Constitution. Is that correct?
100%. It would require a constitutional amendment,
Is there
which
any other way to change this that you can think of?
not that I can think of legally. I mean, it's already enshrined. The only other way would be to bring it for the executive order to get challenged, it make it all the way up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court to rule to overturn the past 100+ years of precedent and interpret it differently. That would be the way that you could do it without a constitutional amendment, would be that the Supreme Court
Mhm.
reverses itself on the meaning of the 14th Amendment.
Is there
That's
any rationale that you can imagine that would allow the Supreme Court, I mean, with as much law as there is on this issue, th is there even a tenable way that the Supreme Court could do that
um
reasonably?
it's hard for me to say. There are people who are more knowledgeable than I. I was stunned at the decision to the presidential immunity decision. There did not seem to be anything in the Constitution that warranted that. Conservatives are typically called textualists, um, strict constructionists, in that they think you shouldn't go outside the bounds of what the framers intended and what's in the Constitution to interpret it. And in this case, in my estimation, they read into the Constitution something that wasn't there. So under normal circumstances, I would say this has no chance whatsoever of being overturned. But there's nobody who oversees the Supreme Court, right? If they
Mhm.
revert themselves, they revert themselves. It doesn't seem plausible to me. Um, I I pretty much think that Alito, um, Gorsuch, and Kavanaugh will basically do anything that Trump wants them to do. I'm not convinced that Roberts and Justice Coney Barrett would do the same thing. So I think
Mhm.
that some of them are I think some of them are going to be thinking about what their legacy is, and I think overturning hundreds of years of precedent
Right.
um, would be a challenge. I think it's unlikely, but it's not impossible, which is why people are so concerned about it.
Right. So I would say that the only oversight that the Supreme Court that this Supreme Court has is a future Supreme Court, right? That's
Right.
that's how the Supreme Court works.
Right.
I agree with you on your assessment that that certainly Roberts and potentially Barrett are not going to be are going to be the least likely to support an overturning. Um, I guess it's not outside the realm of possibility. It seems weird, though. It does seem weird, but th- this is this is an ongoing conversation, and it's a delicate conversation. But the rules have changed, and things are different. 150 years ago, the idea of birthright citizenship was an entirely different prospect than it is today. Back then, America was growing. It wanted people to come settle and also make their own way. You would come to America. You would you know start a farm, whatever it was that people did 150 years ago. Open a blacksmith, and make your own way. But today, citizens can call on resources from the government, so it's a little bit of a different situation. And this is an argument that people on the right have been making, that granting somebody citizenship because they were born in the country may not be the best way of doing things. Now, that being said, whether you agree with that or not, there is still there's still a legal process that you have to go through. You don't get to just say we're not going to do things this legal way anymore. You have to go through the proper channels. My gut tells me that the issuance of this executive order on the part of the Trump administration was the first round of a negotiation, essentially. I don't think that anybody expected it to actually work. I think they knew they were going to get pushback. I think they knew that was going to start a larger conversation, and I think maybe it's a conversation we need to have. Whether we decide to come down for or against the continuation of this policy, maybe we need to hammer it out. What do you think?
Yeah, but I think the way that they went about it the way you went about it by issuing the executive order and for arguing as they did in court that undocumented people born in the United States are not subject to the
Subject to the
jurisdiction
jurisdiction, right?
is a nonsensical argument, right? They've made that argument, right? And so more than that. So I think to me, I agree with you that there's a policy discussion that can happen, and we would probably disagree on it, but it's reasonable to disagree on things like that. Um, because we would probably disagree, and I can just tell people who might be listening that Jubal and I have had conversations about this and about what undocumented workers provide versus what they cost, and whether it's a net positive or negative to the economy, resources, all that. Um, so that's one conversation. Another conversation that to me is more immediate is, do we have a president who respects his oath of office, who understands that when he took the oath of office, his oath of office was to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States, starting off your administration by issuing an executive order that is blatantly unconstitutional says something as well. It
Mhm.
says something about whether or not Donald Trump sees the uh, Constitution as something that he's obligated to follow, or when it gets in his way, could it be, could he try and go around it? That is the more immediate conversation for me. In the case of, I talked about Barack Obama's executive order to close down Guantanamo Bay. That executive order didn't fail because it violated executive authority. I don't think anybody questioned he had the authority to do it. Congress just said, we're not giving you the money for any of that. You
Mhm.
can't use any money to go ahead and bring prisoners over here. You can't use any money to update this prison, this maximum security prison that was in Illinois that wasn't being used. We're not allocating any money for that. Um, and by the way, that that law was had bipartisan support. It wasn't just Republicans who were against it. Democrats were too, and especially Democrats who were in New York, right?
Mhm.
People who were there when 9/11 happened. So in that case, it wasn't him defying the courts or claiming not respecting the Constitution. It was Congress doing what Congress does, saying we control the purse. We're not giving you money for that.
Right.
Um,
So speaking of controlling the purse, I don't know that I think that attributing to Donald Trump a lack of desire to defend the Constitution simply becomes he comes out with an executive order that challenges the Constitution. I think that might be a bridge too far. In the sense that Joe Biden did a similar thing with student debt, right? Where that was ruled unconstitutional, and he continued to try to push forward executive
well,
orders to
he
make that happen.
See, I would disagree in that when Joe Biden did his, and I agree with you, one of the problems with Joe Biden forgiving debt, unilaterally forgiving debt,
Hmm.
was that that costs the country money.
Right. He's not in
That means
control of the purse.
he's not in control of the purse, and so he doesn't have that authority. But Congress has given him limited authority. When he overstepped it, he redid it, right? And tried it again and again until he got something to pass. Much the same way the travel ban was declared unconstitutional, and then Trump tried a
In
second
Trump's
version.
first term. Right.
Yeah, in his first term. Then the second one was declared unconstitutional. The
Right.
third one was acceptable. To me, that's different. It is the case that that's an extension of executive power, and the courts pull it back, and sort of what Jubal's been talking about, if with this Jacksonian principle in both cases, in Biden's case and in Trump's case in the first administration, they respected the court's judgment and said, okay, that's fine, we'll try it again. In this case, it's different. What Joe Biden was doing and what Donald Trump was doing, I don't know that it was like blatantly unconstitutional. It was up for the courts to decide that. And they did, and they respected it. Now you're hearing the Trump administration and people within the Trump administration challenging whether or not the president has to spend money that Congress has allocated. Right? That's what happened with the USAID. Congress had already allocated money. They said we're
Right.
not going to spend it. The birthright citizenship, all seems to point to somebody who doesn't respect the limitations placed on them by the Constitution. And getting back to the theme of all this, when you don't recognize those boundaries, that's what when we get into either what we've talked about as being expansion of executive authority or whether we slip into authoritarianism. Now, I want to make it clear, I don't think we're there, right?
Right.
I don't think we're there yet, but the that's the discussion I think that's relevant about the birthright citizenship executive order. It is blatantly unconstitutional.
Okay.
So go ahead. Sorry.
Couple things real quick. I'm sure we're going to talk about USAID at a later date. So I don't want to dig too much into that. But what I would say is this: I think that there's a piece missing. If you want to say that this is different than either the travel ban or the student loan forgiveness, the difference here is that the you would have to show that Donald Trump's administration put forward this executive order saying you're not a citizen if your parents aren't citizens, essentially. I'm truncating, but you would have to show that they're operating that way, right? That in defiance of the court, they are insisting against citizenship for certain people that are in these situations. I haven't heard of that happening, right? So,
Right.
and that's why I say this is the first round of a negotiation. Trump has thrown out this executive order that he knew was going to be challenged in the same way that maybe Biden knew that the first forgiveness was going to be challenged and the initial travel ban was going to be challenged. It was the first round. So if we're waiting for a second round, that's kind of a good sign, actually, right? It's kind of a good sign. Like I get that Trump is challenging something that is constitutional and that we agree is constitutional. Uh, so the question then is that out is it never okay to challenge rules that have been established or maybe long established constitutionally? And I don't think that that's true. I think that it's always okay to challenge things. It's always
Right.
okay to ask, why do we have this law? Let's have the conversation about this law. The conversation on any particular law is never over. So
Right.
let's continue moving it forward. What you would need to see is you'd need to see defiance of the courts. You
Right.
need to see the
And again,
Jacksonian principle, right?
and I think that's true. Again, I think that's the second conversation. If they defy the courts, I think then we're clearly in a situation where there's a constitutional crisis. We're in that place. That hasn't happened yet, right? So the where we started off, it's a flurry of executive orders, people feeling like things are spiraling out of control. I've described this to other people. That sort of what we're watching is like asymmetrical warfare.
Hmm.
The the Trump administration can drop bombs, in the form of executive orders on an hourly basis. Courts respond slowly, and so it
Hmm.
looks like it's out of balance when you have something that is like sort of the tortoise and hare, something that works quickly and something that works slowly but is very plotting and predictive. And so um, I think people should try to avoid getting overwhelmed
Yeah.
with things. So we're gonna on this on the other issues, we're gonna have to wait um, to see what the court say. I think it will make it up to the Supreme Court. If I had to predict, I would say that that the court would rule is going to rule 5-4 um, at a minimum against this executive order.
Hmm.
That would be my guess. I really think it should be a 9-0.
9-0. Yeah.
There should be a 9-0 thing. Um, then the other dangerous question becomes, and we'll have to wait to see how this unfolds, is what if the court goes along with it? Court goes along with it. Does that mean that we're not moving towards an authoritarian state? If the judiciary isn't performing its function, um, that can be problematic as well. So
Right.
a lot hangs on this as
I
far.
agree with that. I agree with that. That there's a lot in the mix here, but so far, even if the argument itself is distasteful to you, and I know that it's distasteful to a lot of people, and that's okay, right? Um, but nothing untoward has happened yet. Is that fair to say?
Yeah,
It's
I
there's a
mean, right.
potentiality that something weird could happen
Well,
here, but y-
right. I would say that no, as far no, you're right. No, that's fair. As far as this executive order is concerned, nothing's been done. They haven't
mhm,
been able to do anything because the courts have put temporary injunctions on it and said
right,
basically you have to hold off. So nothing has happened. People shouldn't confuse this with what the deportations that are happening. Those are seem like they're about the same thing, but they really are different things. And then so yeah, I think it's fair to say nothing has happened yet. So for
okay.
people who are, again, one other thing, go ahead.
No, no, go ahead, go ahead.
Oh, this is for something for people who are panicking about what's going on. The other thing that I'm sort of recounting something that I read from a guy named Ezra Klein, and he had a very sobering article. He was talking about Donald Trump, and what he was essentially saying was that this flurry of executive orders makes it look like Donald Trump is very strong. His argument was actually Donald Trump is acting very weak, and his argument is that he's acting like a king. These are his words. He's acting like a king because he can't govern like a president.
Mhm.
And what he means by that is that, like Jubal was saying, there are some people who make arguments. I don't necessarily agree with them, but I understand the basis of the arguments for ending birthright citizenship. If what Donald Trump wanted to do, if he was actually strong, what he would do is he would get Congress to pass a law that articulated that same view. That's what he's talking about, and put limitations on how it's been interpreted. Get Congress to adopt it, get the House to pass it, get the Senate to pass it, then somebody would still challenge this legality, but it would have the weight of Congress behind it. And that would be a much stronger argument for its constitutionality than a president doing something. So again, they say what Klein said is he's acting like a king because he can't govern like a president. I think that that's probably true. So as you're watching the flurry of um, executive orders go down, keep that in mind that there's a reason why he's using executive orders because they've got a three-vote margin in the House and in the Senate. In order to pass anything other than budgets, um, requires 60 votes. And I'm like reinterpreting the 14th Amendment. There's no way Democrats are going
Right.
along with that.
So
Go ahead,
I
Jubal.
would say just real quick with respect to Ezra Klein, that if through some miracle Trump was able to mastermind a congressional overthrow of the 14th Amendment and counter birthright citizenship by directly appealing to Congress, and everybody was to wake up tomorrow and suddenly the 14th Amendment has changed entirely. I don't think that would be satisfying to the American people. I think that this issue is important enough that we need to have a broad conversation. This is something that the country needs to talk about this. It needs to be on the Sunday shows. It needs to be in the newspapers and on the blogs. And I think that uh, this administration realized that and start this again. This is the first part of a negotiation. They're throwing the idea out there, knowing that this is going to be talked about. But assuming that there was a 60 vote margin in the Senate and that there was a large majority in the House, and all of a sudden Congress passed a law that made this happen, I don't think it would. I think that would be seen as a sign of authoritarianism.
Yeah,
So,
and I don't. I mean, it would if it had bipartisan support, which is what it would need in the Senate.
mhm,
Um, and then again, it would be challenged in the courts, and if the courts, and depending on how they ruled, I don't think that would. I mean, I personally wouldn't. I would see it as bad policy, but I wouldn't
right,
see it as authoritarianism because Congress would be engaged. And if Congress is engaged, so subcommittees are holding hearings, committees are holding hearings, That's going to be covered in the media. There is going to be a conversation going on among the American people as the process goes through. Um, and if that process was going through and it was persuasive enough that they would have to get 7 Democrats to go ahead and join all 53, assuming all 53 Republicans were in
Mhm.
favor of it, that would be, I don't see how anybody could call that authoritarianism. They could say it was a bad policy for sure,
Right. No,
but
I'm just saying if you
yeah,
were to, you go to sleep one day, you wake up the next day, the 14th Amendment is wholly changed. Uh,
but that's not how it happened. That's not how it happened. It would be
okay,
a
fair enough. I'm
slow
just saying
methodical
anything,
process.
maybe when it comes to constitutional issues, we take our time. We take our
Right.
time and be especially careful. But I take your point. I think so. I think that the measure here is going to be, does the administration continue to listen to the courts and play by those rules? And as soon
Correct.
as they don't, then that is a problem, right? As soon as
Right.
they just they engage the Jacksonian principle and say we're going to do what we want, then that becomes a problem. But so far that hasn't happened.
It
Uh,
has not.
and but I'm sure we'll come back to this issue at some point in the future because this is far from over. Um, Next time we are going to talk about, are we talking about Doge next time? Do you want to talk about Doge
Yeah,
next
we'll
time?
talk about Doge,
Okay. All right. We're going
and
to talk about Doge.
Jubal's going to do his homework.
I'm going to do my homework on Eric Adams so that in the future, after Clement comes back with the knowledge, we can move forward on that. So until next time, thanks for joining us, everybody, and we'll talk to you soon.
And you guys, one thing that you'll have noticed that we've gone live now, right? If you're watching this, it's because we're live now. What, just to reiterate, I think something that we said before, we're going to leave the comment section open on YouTube. And if people want to have conversations and ask us questions, we're happy to engage with people. As I said before, if you're interested in joining us, um, uh, that we might be able to work that out as well.
Fill out this form and
Right. Um, all that we ask is that the conversations be sort of the same thing that Jubal and I do all the time. We disagree, but I hope one thing that's clear to everybody is I really like Jubal. I disagree with him on a lot of things that are really important to me. I really like Jubal,
I really
and
like Phil. It's weird.
he's he's not my enemy, and he's the furthest thing from my enemy that I can imagine. And so that's what I want. So I know people are sort of shutting out people who have different views than themselves. I want everybody to feel to protect themselves against being hurt or spoke to in a way that's mean or disrespectful or anything like that. But to the extent that you can, one of the things, the subtext of all of our videos is talk to people with whom you disagree and
Engage.
often engage. And oftentimes, what you can find is that there's common ground along with the areas of disagreement, and
Right.
that's what's going to make our democracy healthier.
100%. All right. See you next time.